Hi friends, it's Kathy with Sycamore and Cotton, and I'm back a few days late, but here nonetheless. And in this video I have one thrift flip. It is a little shorter than usual, but I've been really busy getting ready for kids to be in this weekend, a birthday party for our grandson, and still lots going on at the mobile home that I'm renovating. We've got family vacation next week, and on top of all that, I closed down my booth located in Corbin, Kentucky, because the venue is closing down itself. I have signed up to be a new vendor at the new business that's coming in there, but they're not opening until they get some renovations done. So all of the current vendors had to move everything out, and we have an opening date for hopefully November. So I have a little bit of time to get ready for that, but that meant clearing everything out and finding somewhere to put it, which I have not completed at this point. So only one project for this video, so let's get started. So this project is flipping this picture frame. There's actually a set of two, but for this video I'm only working on one. I was going to do them as a set and keep them together, but once I got this first one finished, I decided I'll probably not do the second one the same way and not keep them together as a set. Mainly because I'm not 100% crazy about the first one. Some people, I hope, will like it, but it's just not exactly what I envisioned. So I start by giving it a good coat all over. Well, I start by cleaning it like I do everything. And then I gave it a couple of good coats of this paint by Waverly in the color plaster. Any lighter color would do. What I actually had planned to do in the beginning and keeping them as a set was to decoupage the two of them, but I did not have anything to decoupage. So that's when I decided to go with plan B, which is I'm doing a French country little picture using air dry clay and also using stencil, as you see there. Here I'm just laying out my stencil to see how much of it I can use. I know I won't be using the whole thing. Also laying out my molds for the air dry clay just to see what would fit on there and how I could place it. And now I have decided to start out with stripes. So I'm making my markings for adding tape so that I can paint my stripes. I'm using chalk paint by Waverly, and the color is Dusk, and I put two coats on. I thought this would be a really nice color. The blue and white and this shade of blue I thought would be really nice for French country. You don't want to wait too long before moving the tape because you risk pulling up some of the paint that if you've let it the paint dry on the tape. So now I'm just doing some touch-ups there where I had gotten some blue on the inside of the frame. And after it's dried, I use sandpaper to distress some of that paint back and just to make it look a little rustic. Little did I know just how rustic it would turn out in the end. I have my stencil placed. I'm only using that top line, and I had to place it as close to the top as I could get it so that I could fit the air dry castings that I'll be putting on. Rather than stenciling with paint, I decided to use my IOD ink pad. I'm not sure if that was any easier than using a paint dauber or something. Being that the stencil was placed so close to the top of this frame, I wasn't able to get a good impression of the top parts of the wording. So what I ended up doing with that is that's when I decided to add this floral design all around the frame, which I had planned on adding some air dry clay design to the edges of the frame anyway, but I ended up taking it all the way around, so that it would help disguise where I wasn't able to get a good stencil. And what I ended up doing was actually pouring out just a little bit of the ink that I had on that stamp pad, and then using my brush, or the foam brush, to try to get a little bit better. And that did help. The molds that I'm using are a crest, which is the one that I have there, and then the other two are two leaping rabbits going in opposite directions. Working with air dry clay is pretty easy. I'm using Sculpey clay. I get it at Walmart. It is the only brand of air dry clay that I've used. And these two molds of the rabbits came from Amazon. They're a little challenging to get out because the limbs of the rabbits, their little legs and also their ears and tail, are so small, so thin, that you have to be really careful when you're unmolding them, or else they'll break. But I actually didn't have much of a problem. I did let the clay sit in the mold for a few minutes before I unmolded it, and that might have helped a little bit. I don't know. Some people will put their mold in a refrigerator for a few minutes and let it harden up a little that way. I haven't tried that before, one, because I don't have a refrigerator in my workshop. I'm pushing down to make sure that I get the air dry clay as compact as possible and as smooth as possible on the back. And see here, they did unmold really easily. Now this one I do have to give just a little help to it by using very carefully my X-Acto knife just to help hold down those smaller parts. And I'm getting them placed, deciding where I want them to be, and then I'm going to glue them down using Titebond's Quick and Thick glue. This is the vine that I'll be putting all around the edge. I chose this because I could work it so that parts of it would come down over the lettering there at the top where I messed up. And I didn't know any other way to fix it but to have some of that vine flowing over the edges of the frame. So that seemed to work pretty well. This mold also is a little challenging to use, of the floral vine, because it's also kind of flimsy. It's about, I don't know, 2 to 3 inches of little leaves that are vine-like, and they have little berries at the end of them, and it just, I've struggled to get a full piece out without it breaking. So basically I worked with it in small sections, and that seemed to help, but it took a little bit longer. Here I'm just using my X-Acto knife to kind of trim off any places where there was just not clean edges, where the edges weren't especially clean on the clay. If excess glue seeps out underneath the castings, then I clean those up right away, because any dried glue is going to show on the work, and it will also interfere with any finishes that I put on after the glue. Since there's quite a bit of castings to make of this floral vine, I'm going to show just this part here, and then I'm going to go ahead and jump to the end where I've got all of the air dry castings applied around the edges of the frame. Usually I go ahead and paint the castings as soon as they're attached, but because these castings, especially the trim around the frame and the smaller parts of the rabbit, the tail, the legs, the ears, they're pretty delicate, fragile, so I waited for the clay just to dry up a little bit. Not a whole lot, but enough so that when I started applying this paint, and it's the same paint that I used to cover the whole piece in the beginning, Plaster by Waverly. After getting all of the castings painted in this white plaster, I let it sit overnight to dry really well, and then come in the next day and start to apply a crackling component by PintArt. Now, I really like the way this is looking so far, and I'm thinking this crackle is just going to be wonderful for it. I am applying it with a fan brush. This is a two-part crackle process where you apply this glue-like component and then come back in with the second step, and it forms a crackle when it dries. I just remembered this is PintArt's classic crackle, not the fine line crackle. I had used fine line crackle before. I really like fine line crackle. The classic crackle is actually a much smaller crackle. I like it because you can use a water-based product on top of it. The fine line crackle, you can't. And so that's why I decided to start using this classic crackle. However, I do prefer the look that you get from the fine line crackle. So anyway, I get component 1 on there and then let it sit for a few hours, maybe 2-3 hours, and then come back with step 2, which is what I'm doing right now. And then I dry that. I do pull out my hairdryer and help to force that crackle by using the heat on it. And then I also let it sit overnight as well, and come back in the next day and apply Fusion Clear Wax all along the castings, because I'm going to be putting a dark wax on to bring out the crackle, and I don't want the castings to get very dark. So I'm trying to protect them by putting the clear wax on first so that any of the dark wax can be removed more easily and hopefully won't come out as dark. Now I'm using DIY's black wax. Probably in hindsight I should have used Sweet Pickens dark oil wax because it would not have been as dark. But for some reason I grabbed the black. I'm not sure why. I did thin it down with mineral spirits. I love to use mineral spirits when I use the black wax because it does lighten it up quite a lot. And I'm putting it on everywhere, but as you can see, it's not super dark. And I use a clean shop towel to wipe off as much of that dark wax as I can. It still turns out darker than what I had in mind. So I get the Fusion, Clear Fusion wax again, and then I just start putting it all over everything, because it'll also act as an eraser. By applying the clear wax on, I can remove some of the darker, and that helped a little bit. But I'm still thinking, oh, this is really not the way that I had envisioned this project going. So I pull out some Rub and Buff and start putting that all around the edges of the frame, and I end up going over the rabbit and the crest as well. And the whole time I'm thinking to myself, this is really not turning out how I envisioned. It's not necessarily bad, but it's just not what I had in mind. And I think that my first mistake was using the classic crackle instead of the fine line crackle. And my second mistake was using the dark wax instead of, or the black wax instead of Sweet Pickens oil wax, because that definitely is a much lighter approach. So this is what it ends up looking like, because the more I used the Rub and Buff, the more I got carried away, and I was just not even thinking about what I was doing. Next thing I knew, without even thinking it through, I was putting that Rub and Buff even on the striped areas. So I don't know what got into me, but it was definitely not the look that I was going for. And this is what it ended up looking like when I left for the evening, thinking, I've ruined this project. Yeah, not what I envisioned at all. At this point, I was ready to start all over. I wanted to just paint it all white again and start over. But then I realized, how am I going to get those stripes on there? How will I get the stencil on there? I can't start over. So I did take some of the blue paint and dabbed on the blue stripes to try to bring back a little bit more brightness. That was my main problem, is everything was just too dark. And then I did the same with the white stripes. I added more rub and buff around the edges of the frame and made that a heavier gold on that. And I'm actually not too upset with it now. It's still not what I had in my mind, but I think it turned out, in the end, better than I thought that it would have by the time I got to the realization that this is not gone the way that I thought it would. I get comments from viewers that I'm so hard on myself, and I think we're all our worst critic, but it's not that I'm being hard on myself. It's just that it just took a different turn, and you know, I should have chosen a different oil wax. I'm sure that was the biggest issue that I had in it getting darker than what I had thought. But in the end, I'm not unhappy, and it's now listed in my Etsy shop and also on display in my booth at the Emporium at 2120. And that's it for this week's video. Again, I'm sorry that I only had just this one project, but I may be running a few days late on my next video as well, since we will be spending all of next week with our kids. But follow me on social media. I'm really active on Facebook and Instagram, and I will be putting updates there, so hopefully you'll find me there and we can stay in touch. And I'll be back soon with full videos, and guess what's next? Christmas in July, and I can't wait to show you some things that I've got going for that. You all have a great 4th of July, 250th birthday of the United States, holiday weekend, and stay safe out there. Thanks for all of your support, and I'll see you real soon. Bye.